Focus fire on their command vessel. Warlord Dragan's voice sliced through the chaos in the Valthor's command center, sending shockwaves across the deck. His knuckles were white as he gripped the console, watching with narrowed eyes as Earth's fleet slowly came into view, meager, insignificant specks compared to the vast might of the Council. The engines of the Valthor hummed with lethal intent. It was massive, a hulking behemoth, its cannons stretching long and sharp as blades. Its dark hull shimmered in the vacuum of space, practically daring the small human fleet to challenge it. The enemy ships were barely worth considering. It would be a simple matter to sweep them aside. All units, target Earth's flagship. Show them what happens when you challenge the Galactic Council, Dragan barked, his lips curling into a sneer. The crew didn't flinch. He was right. Earth had no chance. His gaze turned to the viewport, where Earth hung in the distance, innocent and unprepared. It's almost pathetic, he muttered to himself. To think they believe they can stand against us. This will be over before they even realize they're in danger. The communications officer hesitated for a moment, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Lord Dragan, we're detecting unusual readings from the human fleet. They're not responding the way we anticipated. Dragan didn't even spare the officer a glance. What are you babbling about? Prepare to fire, he growled. He was done listening to their feeble warnings. The officer's voice quivered. Sir, the readings are consistent across the fleet. It's not just a glitch. Something's wrong. We can't get a solid lock on their movements. Annoyance flared in Dragan's chest. I don't care about their movements. I care about watching them burn. He shot a venomous glare at the officer, whose hands trembled on the console. Meanwhile, on Earth's side of the void, Lucian Draeven stood at the helm of humanity's first real space force, his stance rigid yet unfazed. The command center around him buzzed with energy as the fleet prepared for its first engagement on the galactic stage. His calm demeanor was like a blade cutting through the tension. Admiral Vex? Lucian's voice was deliberate, but his eyes sparkled with hidden intent. It's time. Vex didn't need to be told twice. The seasoned admiral, a man used to warfare on a scale beyond imagination, immediately turned to his crew. Activate cloaking. Initiate quantum drive. Lucian watched the flickering holograms around him, each one displaying different angles of the incoming enemy forces. The Galactic Council's fleet was enormous, an intimidating sight. However, it was the very thing that would make them vulnerable. Their arrogance, their reliance on overwhelming size, would be their undoing. We're not going to fight them the way they expect, Lucian muttered under his breath. Let them believe we're powerless. The command center hummed to life as Earth's fleet moved into position, each ship activating its cloaking systems. Earth's ships, unlike anything the Council had ever seen, melted into the darkness of space, vanishing from view with an eerie silence. They weren't just invisible. They were cleverly hidden, emitting false readings to confuse even the most sophisticated galactic sensors. Lucian took a deep breath, the only sound the steady pulse of his own heartbeat. His mind was already 10 steps ahead of the battle, his strategy forming in a way that no one, least of all the Galactic Council, could anticipate. Admiral Vex, Lucian's voice broke the silence, sharp and calculated. Send the signal. We begin. In the heart of the Valthor, Dragan stared out at Earth with an arrogant sneer, watching his fleet's progress. The time for the kill was near. They had entered the Sol system, Earth's last stand. Fire! Now! He ordered. His hand slammed onto the console and the order echoed across the bridge. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A flash of light, too quick for the eye to follow, erupted from the distance. The Valthor shook violently, and the alarms blared to life. Dragan's grip tightened around the armrest as the sound of the explosion thundered through the command deck. What the hell was that? Dragan growled, spinning around, but before he could demand an answer, another barrage hit the shields, rocking the flagship. This time it wasn't just a minor tremor. It was like the universe itself had been split in two. The Valthor's powerful shields were already flickering, straining under the impact. Report! Dragan bellowed, his voice filled with disbelief. The communications officer's voice trembled as he stared at the data streaming across his screen. "Sir, we've detected railgun fire. Precise, fast-moving projectiles. The energy signatures, they're too advanced to be human." Dragan's face twisted with fury, disbelief spreading through him like wildfire. "Impossible. They're supposed to be weak. Their ships are nothing more than toys. There's no way they can have weapons like this." "Sir, they're ships. They're cloaked," the officer stammered. "We can't track them. There's no sign of where they're coming from." The next barrage hit with a force that nearly threw Dragan off his feet. His face turned pale as the feedback from his ship's failing system screamed through the bridge. Another railgun shot streaked through the cold void, ramming into the Valthor's starboard flank. Dragan's hand flew to his sidearm, his thoughts muddled with fury and confusion. "Return fire!" he screamed. "Find them! We cannot let these insects embarrass us!" His mind raced. It was a mistake, a miscalculation. This was just a fluke. Earth could not have prepared for something like this. But despite his commands, Earth ships continued to strike with relentless precision, hitting vital areas of the Valthor with calculated coldness. The pain was not instant, but it was swift, slicing through their armor and weakening the mighty vessel. Back on Earth's side, Lucian watched through the heads-up display, observing the damage to the Council's flagship. He was still calm, almost unnervingly so. He knew that this was only the beginning. They had provoked a fight, but it would not be decided in brute force. Earth had no need for the kind of weaponry the Council boasted. The true weapon was humanity's mind, their ability to improvise, to think differently, and to strike when least expected. His voice broke through the chaos, sharp and cool. "Phase 1 complete. Continue to Phase 2. Prepare the strike teams." The Valthor's first response struck like a thunderclap, tearing through the empty void, but Earth's fleet wasn't where they thought it would be. The railguns had pierced the Council's advanced shields with unnerving force, yet the humans had already disappeared back into the shadows of space, like predators hiding just outside the kill zone. It was a war of misdirection. Dragan's teeth ground together as the cold reality of the situation crept in. The Valthor was a fortress, its weaponry second to none, and yet the humans' first strike had already left its mark. He should have been laughing at them, crushing them, but now his hands shook with the fury of a man who had been proven wrong. "Again!" he snarled, barely keeping his voice controlled. "Activate the tracking systems, increase firepower, and send out every intercept ship. I don't care if we have to burn this solar system to find them. I want them eradicated." The officers scrambled, fingers tapping frantically across their consoles, but their faces were blank, confused. The sensors, normally so sharp and reliable, were now chaotic. Their readings flickered and bounced wildly, failing to lock onto anything solid. "What's happening?" Dragan demanded. A young officer stammered, sweat already beading on his brow. "My lord, they're cloaking systems. It's beyond anything we've encountered. The human ships aren't just cloaked, they're distorting the data. It's like they're rewriting the signals to hide in plain sight." Dragan's gaze shifted to the massive viewport, his mind racing. "They've done more than hide themselves. They've turned our own systems against us." His mind snapped back to the task at hand. He had a fleet of ships, the power of the Council behind him, and yet he couldn't pin down these human ghosts. This was no longer a battle of strength. It was a battle of will. Back on Earth, Lucian Draeven remained as collected as ever, despite the tension building within his own command center. The screen in front of him showed the Valthor, a massive speck of darkness now slowly moving across the solar system. A single small blip on the radar, a fleeting moment before it vanished again. "Admiral Vex," Lucian said, voice quiet yet sharp. "We need to keep them guessing. Initiate Phase 2, prepare for engagement." Vex, standing at the helm, gave a single nod. His expression was unreadable. The time for subtlety was over. It was time for Earth to prove that it wasn't the size of the fleet that mattered. It was how they fought. His eyes narrowed as he tapped a series of commands into the heads-up display. "Prepare for their next mistake," Vex muttered under his breath. Lucian's eyes flicked to the nearby console where Ryland Castor was already making adjustments. The chief engineer stood, hands moving rapidly across the laser plasma screens. I've modified the quantum drive systems to give us an edge in maneuverability. If they think we're just hiding, they've miscalculated. Lucian observed the tension tightening in Ryland's shoulders. It wasn't often that the calm engineer allowed himself to display such emotion. Ryland was no fighter. He was the mind behind the machines, the one who'd made sure Earth's ships were not only capable of standing against the Council's armada, but beating it with cunning and surprise. "Have the strike teams ready," Lucian said, glancing at the tactical screens once more. "Commander Valtrin should be in position. We'll need to hit them fast and hard when they finally reveal themselves." As the minutes stretched on, Earth's fleet moved like shadows, too fast for the Council to keep up with, yet close enough to maintain the tension of an impending strike. The strike teams, a carefully selected force of the most skilled soldiers, waited for the precise moment. They weren't just fighting the Council, they were rewriting the rules of warfare in real time, turning the Council's own size and arrogance into their greatest weaknesses. The waiting was unbearable for some. The hum of the command center filled the silence, broken only by the sharp click of fingers on screens, the constant barrage of updates, and the tension rising as Earth's ships continued their evasion tactics. The Council was still out there, firing blindly into the void. "How long do we keep this up, Lucian?" Vex asked, his voice thick with frustration, but also a twisted sort of exhilaration. "How long before we show them what we can really do?" Lucian's eyes flickered to the screen, observing the movements of the Council's ships. He knew what Vex was asking. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about proving Earth's worth. Every inch of space was a battlefield in this war of nerves, and Lucian's mind raced through each possible outcome. "We wait," Lucian replied, his voice laced with purpose. "And then we strike with everything we have. This isn't just a military fight. This is about sending a message. And that message will come when they least expect it." Meanwhile, Warlord Dragan, unable to accept the creeping doubt, paced furiously across the command deck. His massive warship seemed to pulse in tune with his growing frustration. The scanners were still a mess, the fleet still scattered, and Earth's ships? They remained ghosts. His mind churned through possibilities, each more ludicrous than the last, but none of them brought answers. "Blast it!" Dragan shouted, slamming his fist against the console, sending a cascade of data across the room. "I've had enough of these games. Bring every ship into firing range. Let's burn them to ash." His crew stiffened. The command was extreme, but it was his word, his law. The Valthor and the other warships aligned, preparing to fire indiscriminately. The weapon systems flickered on, ready to unleash destruction with a flick of Dragan's hand. He'd seen entire civilizations reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye. Earth would be no different. "All ships open fire!" Dragan roared, but Earth's response came not in fire, but in shadow. Just as Dragan had ordered the assault, Earth's fleet materialized in the distance, and the sudden barrage from Earth's railguns hit with the force of a tidal wave crashing into the shore. A single shot tore into the heart of the Council's flagship, the Valthor, its shields splintering with a deafening crack, sending a shockwave of raw energy through the bridge. "Direct hit," the officer said, voice trembling as the console sparked. "Impossible," Dragan whispered, watching as his flagship's hull shuddered violently. "How did they—" Before he could finish, another shot rang out, this one piercing deeper, right through the Valthor's weakened core. Panic rippled through his crew, the sounds of alarms deafening, but Dragan remained rooted in disbelief. They couldn't possibly be doing this. These human ships, these pathetic toys, were breaking his fleet apart. "Get the fleet back in formation," Dragan yelled, but his voice held less command now. It was tinged with desperation. Lucian Draeven's calm response, transmitted across the stars, echoed in Dragan's mind. "Next time, send better ships." Dragan's eyes widened as the full weight of the message sank in. Earth had already won the first round. Warlord Dragan stood frozen in the midst of the chaos, eyes fixed on the live feed from the Valthor's main display. His chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, the hum of alarms surrounding him as the crew scrambled to regain control. The once proud flagship now bore the marks of humanity's defiance, strikes that had shattered its outer hull and damage reports flashing across the laser plasma displays. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "We've been hit in the lower sections, my lord," an officer shouted from the side. "Their fire is too concentrated. We're losing power." A blast of anger surged through Dragan's veins, making his blood run hot. "This cannot be happening!" he roared. His fists slammed against the console, the metal screeching under the pressure. The Valthor had been built to withstand everything the galaxy could throw at it. Yet here it was, floundering under a human onslaught that should have been nothing more than a minor nuisance. His eyes darted to the tactical map, where the remaining Council fleet appeared scattered, disoriented. The humans were not merely evading, they were methodically dismantling his forces, one strike at a time. Their ships moved like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles, always one step ahead. His mind raced, scrambling for any advantage, but the human fleet's ability to stay hidden and then strike when least expected was tearing apart his resolve. "We have to strike back," Dragan barked, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Mobilize every interceptor we have left. Target their cloaking systems." The officer hesitated before responding, his voice shaking. "My lord, we can't detect their ships with any accuracy. They're moving faster than our sensors can track. Every time we try to target them, they're already somewhere else." The revelation hit Dragan like a slap. His ships were being toyed with. This was no longer about overpowering the humans with sheer force. This was a battle of wits. And at least for now, Earth had the upper hand. On Earth, Lucian Draeven's fingers hovered over the communication panel, watching the destruction unfold across the Valthor's hull. The first strike had landed just as planned, but now the real test began. His fleet had dealt a devastating blow, but the Council would not surrender so easily. The war had only just begun, and Lucian knew that the Council's pride would demand retaliation. "Admiral Vex," Lucian's voice was steady, his gaze unblinking as he observed the fading glow of the Valthor's weakening shields. "We've done our part. Now we need to make them believe they're still in control." Vex's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. The Admiral was a man of action, but he knew the importance of Lucian's words. "You want them to overcommit," he murmured. It wasn't a question. Lucian nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the screen. "Exactly. They're disoriented, but they'll rally. Their pride won't allow them to back down. Let them think they're regaining control, then we'll strike again. This time harder. We can't let them understand how outmatched they really are." Vex tapped a few commands into the heads-up display, his fingers quick and decisive. The fleet adjusted its position, retreating just far enough to give the illusion of retreat. But Lucian knew better. This wasn't a retreat. It was a calculated step back, allowing the Council to believe they had the upper hand. "Phase 1 has been successful," Vex muttered to himself. "They're playing right into our hands." Lucian's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "Now we wait." Back on the Valthor, Dragan was already strategizing his next move. His crew scrambled to stabilize the ship, but he could already feel the shift in momentum. The humans hadn't just attacked, they had outsmarted him. His mind burned with the need to retaliate, to show the galaxy that the Council's might couldn't be so easily shaken. But every order he gave only seemed to push him further into a corner. He stormed over to the officer in charge of communications, his rage barely contained. "What's their position?" he demanded, his voice a dangerous growl. "We've lost track of them again, my lord," the officer said, fear thick in his voice. "We can't even pinpoint their signatures. They're using some sort of interference. We're blind." Dragan's patience snapped. His hand shot out, grabbing the officer by the collar, lifting him off his feet. "Find them," he hissed. "I don't care what it takes, just bring me their location." As the officer struggled to respond, Dragan dropped him, pacing back and forth. His mind reeled, struggling to make sense of what was happening. The humans had no right to be this effective. It made no sense. They were supposed to be inferior. And yet, his fleet was falling apart. Earth's smaller, seemingly outdated ships were turning the tide. The thought of it gnawed at him. Earth had been nothing more than a backwater planet, a minor player in the grand galactic theater. Yet, here they were, dismantling his armada with eerie efficiency. And worse yet, he couldn't even figure out how they were doing it. It was as if they were everywhere and nowhere at once, a maddening, invisible threat. On Earth's flagship, Lucian turned from the tactical display, his expression unchanging. He wasn't just managing the battle, he was controlling it, each move carefully orchestrated to pull the Council further into the trap he'd set. His mind flicked through contingency plans as the Valthor's floundering became more apparent. The Council was unraveling, and it was only a matter of time before their desperation would work against them. "Commander Valtran," Lucian's voice cut through the silence, "prepare your teams. When the time comes, we won't just strike, we'll incapacitate." Valtran, Earth's best in covert operations, gave a sharp nod, his eyes hard and focused. "We're ready. Just say the word." Lucian studied the screens, the enemy fleet now appearing more disjointed, more panicked. He knew it wouldn't take long for Dragan to lash out, but he also knew that in his blind fury, the Warlord would make mistakes, and those mistakes would be their undoing. He glanced at the communications panel, where his fleet was waiting for the next signal. Every officer, every soldier knew their part in the grand scheme. The Council thought this was still a fight. But to Lucian, this was never about strength. It was always about outwitting them, outlasting them, and now the Council was ripe for the taking. "Phase 2 begins," Lucian said softly, his voice like ice. In the heart of the Valthor, Dragan stood at the central command, his back rigid with fury. He had ordered every ship in his fleet to pursue, to corner the humans and obliterate them. But every move he made seemed to push him further into uncertainty. His officers were scrambling to track the enemy, but it was all in vain. They couldn't even pin down their position, let alone land a decisive strike. He slammed his fist into the console in front of him, the sharp clang ringing out across the room. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Earth had something he hadn't accounted for. It was more than just technology or tactics. It was their resolve, their intelligence, and their ability to turn the tide with one move. For the first time since the battle began, Warlord Dragan wasn't sure if they would win, and that, more than anything, terrified him. Dragan stood motionless, eyes fixed on the tactical display where Earth's fleet seemed to vanish and reappear in bursts of chaos. The Valthor's hull was scarred, its weapon systems strained under the relentless barrage. His command bridge, once a hub of confidence and power, had become a den of uncertainty. The same officers who had once spoken in awe of the Council's might now whispered to each other, their faces pale. "Target lock lost again, my lord," the chief tactical officer reported, his voice betraying the fear creeping into his mind. "We can't track them. Every time we engage, they disappear, only to reappear in a new quadrant." "Enough!" Dragan's voice cut through the room like a blade. He slammed his fist down onto the console, sending a ripple through the metal surface. His breathing was ragged, his fury burning beneath every word. "Find them, pin them down. We cannot keep floundering like this." "Yes, my lord," the officer replied weakly, though the despair was evident in his eyes. Dragan's mind raced, unable to comprehend the turn this battle had taken. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had broken through his defenses, outsmarted him at every turn, and now they were toying with his entire fleet. The same arrogance that had fueled his confidence was slowly eating away at his resolve. He couldn't allow this. Earth had to be crushed, and fast. He turned his gaze to the viewport, watching Earth's tiny blue marble in the distance. To think, a race so small, so young could cause this much trouble. It gnawed at him, unsettled him. The thought of it made him feel vulnerable, something he hadn't felt in centuries. A sudden alarm broke his thoughts. A piercing sound sliced through the command deck, signaling the detection of a new human ship signature. Dragan snapped to attention, his pulse quickening. "Lock onto it! Now!" The bridge crew scrambled, fingers dancing across their consoles. The laser plasma displays flickered, showing the incoming human ship, a new one, smaller, sleeker than the others. It darted across the screen, its trajectory erratic, a move that defied all known patterns. "They're faster than we anticipated," the officer said, as his hands shook while adjusting the targeting systems. Dragan narrowed his eyes. The ship was close now, but it didn't fire immediately. Instead, it passed directly under the Valthor, barely within the reach of its guns. But it wasn't its weapons that Dragan feared. It was the silence that followed. A cold realization gripped him as his eyes flicked to the heads-up display, where his fleet was now becoming fragmented, every ship scattering to avoid yet another unexpected attack. They were slipping. His fleet, his pride, was unraveling. "Are they retreating?" Dragan's voice was hoarse, laced with disbelief. "Number, it's too quiet, too calculated." On Earth's flagship, Lucian Draeven's gaze was sharp as he observed the latest developments. The chaos he had orchestrated was unfolding exactly as planned, but he knew the Council would soon realize that they were being set up. Now it was time to finish what they had started. He turned to Admiral Vex, his voice calm but insistent. "It's time, Admiral. Prepare Phase 3. We've given them the illusion of control long enough. Now we strike." Vex's lips curled slightly, the lines of his face hardening with resolve. "I've been waiting for this," he murmured, already moving toward the tactical station. The screens around him flickered to life, illuminating the darkness of the command room. His fingers tapped rapidly across the controls, adjusting course vectors and locking onto key Council targets. Lucian's eyes shifted to the strike team commander standing off to the side. "Valtran," he called, his voice smooth and unwavering. "Get your teams ready. We go in hard and fast." Commander Jorik Valtran nodded without hesitation. His face was impassive, but there was an intensity in his eyes. "Ready when you are," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of years spent in the shadows. Lucian turned his attention back to the laser plasma displays, his mind calculating the next moves. His plan had been risky, baiting the Council with false moves, giving them just enough hope to lure them into the trap, but it was working. The Valthor was already off balance, and its fleet was fracturing. Now the strike teams would strike at the heart of their command structure, destabilizing the entire operation. "Phase 3 begins," Lucian muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing as the fleet shifted into its next phase. A wave of calculated calm washed over him as the plan moved into action. Back on the Valthor, Dragan's grip tightened on the console as his fleet continued to disintegrate. Ships were no longer where they should be. The humans' tactics were more than just frustrating. They were suffocating. He knew what they were doing now. They weren't merely evading. They were luring him in, playing with his pride. But it was the silence after the latest attack that rattled him. His fleet, once a formidable force, was scattered, blind, vulnerable. Every attempted strike only seemed to further disrupt the flow of battle. He had made too many miscalculations. His forces were beginning to panic, and panic in war was deadly. A sudden sharp alarm erupted across the bridge. The officer glanced up, his face drained of color. "My lord, we've lost contact with the rear flank. Entire ships, gone. No signals." Dragan froze, his mind running through the possibilities. "What do you mean, gone?" "You've lost contact, just like that?" The officer nodded, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "It's like they never existed. Our sensors can't detect anything. They've been erased from the system." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Valthor, the heart of his fleet, trembled slightly as though it too sensed the danger closing in. Dragan shot to his feet. "Scramble every ship! Find them! Find those humans and eliminate them, or this entire fleet will fall apart." On Earth's side, Lucian felt the shift. The Council had responded as expected, mobilizing the remnants of their fleet into position. The first phase of the plan had worked. They were disoriented, but the final push would require every ounce of ingenuity they had left. Lucian's fingers hovered over the console, his mind calculating their next move. "Admiral, ready your forces," he said quietly, his gaze flicking over the final deployment details on the laser plasma display. "We end this now. Let's show them that humanity's ingenuity is their greatest weapon." The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Commander Valtrin's teams were already in position, the strike teams poised to cripple the heart of the Valthor. The moment was close. Humanity was ready to turn the tide once and for all. But there was one final element Lucian was certain of. The Council had underestimated them. The battle was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to reshape the galaxy. And in the cold expanse of space, Earth would make its mark. Dragan, now almost frantic, could feel the walls closing in. His fleet was shattered, his pride in tatters. "Where are they?" he roared, a final, desperate plea. "Where is the human fleet?" But his question, like his hope, was already slipping into the void. The moment was slipping away from him, and this time there was no way to stop it. The Valthor groaned under the pressure, its once pristine hull now riddled with blackened scars and fractured panels. The corridors of the massive warship were alive with the frantic movements of crew members scrambling to repair damage. But the task was impossible. The ship's systems were failing, its heart slowly suffocating under a steady barrage of human ingenuity. Warlord Dragan stood at the center of his command deck, his expression twisted in a mixture of disbelief and rage. Every display around him flickered with erratic signals, the laser plasma screens showing broken images, distorted readings. His massive hands clenched into fists, the veins on his arms bulging as the familiar, sharp pain of frustration seared through him. His fleet was crumbling, and worse, he still couldn't comprehend how. "We've lost half our fleet," one of his officers said, his voice a strained whisper. "The rest are scattered. Their systems, we can't track them. They're everywhere and nowhere at once." Dragan's eyes burned with desperation. "What do you mean, nowhere? Fix it now," he snapped, his voice cracking with the weight of his orders. But the crew worked in silence, overwhelmed and unable to provide the answers he so desperately sought. The Valthor's flagship, his symbol of power, was being torn apart by a fraction of the force he had assumed would be powerless. "How are they doing this?" Dragan muttered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips, as he gazed out the viewport at the swirling chaos outside. A handful of ships remained, but they were mere shadows in the shadow of humanity's success. Their once imposing firepower had been turned against them, dismantled piece by piece. This shouldn't be happening. Across the laser plasma displays, scattered images of human ships flickered, each one moving with fluid precision. Their designs utterly unlike anything Dragan had anticipated. The speed, the adaptability, they had thought Earth ships were simple. But they were anything but. They moved like quicksilver, unpredictable and deadly. Lucian Draeven stood at the helm of the human flagship, watching the destruction unfold with a calmness that belied the intensity of the moment. The battle was nearly won, but he could sense the weight of their victory. Each tactical movement, each calculated strike had brought them to this point, but it wasn't over yet. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the lingering taste of triumph that wasn't quite sweet yet. "Admiral Vex," Lucian called out, his voice steady, as his eyes scanned the laser plasma displays, each line and curve tracing the path of their final assault. "Prepare for Phase 4. We need to press the advantage." Vex, silent as ever, only nodded, his eyes narrowing with focus as he studied the failing Council fleet. He didn't need to say anything. His actions spoke for him. The strategy was simple now, no mercy. Every human ship was ready to pounce, each one poised to strike the heart of the scattered enemy. But Lucian knew better than anyone that nothing was certain until the final blow had landed. "You want them to bleed," Vex muttered under his breath, his voice like gravel, his words edged with dark satisfaction. Lucian's lips curled into a thin smile, eyes flicking briefly to the officers manning their stations. "Not just bleed," he said, his voice a whisper of steel. "I want them to break." Dragan's grip on the console tightened until his knuckles turned white. The Valthor was failing, but his pride refused to let go. "We're not finished yet," he spat, his voice strained and full of a deep, burning rage. "Find them. We can still crush them. We can still win this." "Sir, there's no sign of the humans. They're moving too fast," the officer at the tactical station said, his voice low but tinged with uncertainty. "They're using some kind of disruptor, scrambling our sensors. We can't pinpoint their location. Dragan's eyes flared with fury. This isn't a game. Get it together. I didn't come this far to lose to them. The command deck was alive with tension as officers scrambled, desperately attempting to regain control of their systems. Yet each attempt only further proved how far out of their depth they were. Each ship that had once stood with him, proud, invincible, was now caught in the web of Earth's intelligence and ruthlessness. Their strength had been their downfall. Earth had never needed to match their power. They had only needed to outthink them. Dragan's mind raced through the choices that had brought him here. Every move, every decision had been made with certainty, until now. He had underestimated them, and now they were making him pay for it. On Earth's side, Commander Valtran's voice echoed across the bridge. "We're in position," he reported, his voice low with a quiet intensity that carried the weight of experience. His strike teams were already preparing for the final push, moving silently and swiftly. The element of surprise was still their greatest weapon. Lucian's eyes were fixed on the display as the Valthor staggered under the weight of the humans' assault. Every strike had been a calculated risk, a careful plan executed with precision. And now, with the final assault closing in, he knew it was time to finish what they had started. The Council would never be the same. "Phase 4, Lucian murmured, barely audible. "Now." The first strike hit the Valthor's exposed flank with the full force of Earth's remaining firepower. The ship trembled, its once proud engines sputtering under the relentless assault. The Council's last defense was a hollow shell, a crumbling monument to their arrogance. The explosion sent a shockwave through the command deck. A deafening roar echoed through the ship as the shields finally gave way, unable to withstand the concentrated barrage. Sparks flew from the walls, and the once powerful lights of the Valthor flickered before plunging the bridge into darkness. "Return fire!" Dragan screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos around him. "Where are my interceptors? I said, return fire!" But it was too late. The final blow had already been struck. Earth's ships moved with lethal purpose, their railguns blasting apart the remaining defenses, dismantling what was left of the Council's pride. A final burst of energy lit up the Valthor, sending a blinding flash across the system. Lucian watched the feed in silence, his face set in calm determination. The Council had been torn apart. Dragan had been humbled. Earth had emerged victorious, not through force, but through the cold precision of calculated warfare. "We did it," Valtran said, his voice a whisper, barely audible above the sounds of victory. Lucian's eyes never left the display. "Not yet. There's still work to be done." As the Council's flagship slowly crumbled, Lucian's final words, transmitted across the stars, rang out with undeniable clarity. "Next time, send better ships." The silence that followed the Valthor's destruction was deafening. The massive warship had all but evaporated in a final blaze of energy, leaving nothing but debris drifting through the cold void. Earth's victory was absolute, but as the last remnants of the Council's fleet limped away, their pride shattered, a new reality began to take shape, one that felt far more fragile than it appeared on the surface. Lucian Draeven watched the laser plasma display, his eyes narrowing with a steely focus as the system map shifted. Earth's ships had already begun the slow journey back to the homeworld, their task complete. But Lucian knew that victory came with consequences. The aftermath was just as dangerous, if not more so, than the battle itself. A soft chime echoed in the command center. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer reported, his voice tight. Lucian barely glanced at the officer, his gaze still locked on the displays. He knew who it would be. The Galactic Council, or what was left of it, was already scrambling to salvage whatever dignity they could from the wreckage. "Patch it through," Lucian ordered, his voice unwavering. The image of Chancellor Zyros Veltan flickered to life on the screen. The once proud leader of the Galactic Council looked a shadow of himself, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with the weight of their defeat. His appearance alone spoke volumes. He was no longer the towering figure he once was, but a broken man, struggling to hold on to whatever authority remained. Lucian Draeven, Zyros Veltan's voice rasped, his tone a mix of bitterness and resignation. You've won, as you always intended. But this is not the end. The Council is in disarray, and the galaxy will not forgive you so easily. Lucian's lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no amusement in it, only the edge of a man who knew what was coming. The galaxy will have to adapt, just as the Council will, he replied, his voice calm, but with a sharp undertone that betrayed the certainty in his words. I didn't fight for survival, Zyros. I fought to show you that the balance of power has changed. Zyros sneered, but there was no real force behind it anymore. You think the Council's collapse will bring peace? You are a fool if you believe that. Other factions are already mobilizing. The void left by the Council's fall will be filled with new enemies, new challenges, and when they come, Earth will be alone. Lucian's eyes flicked to the tactical displays. The readings showed no immediate threats, but Lucian's mind had already started working, calculating the next move. He knew Zyros was right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That's a risk I'm willing to take, Lucian replied evenly, his gaze unwavering. Humanity will not be cowed by threats. We've faced worse. We will rebuild this galaxy in our image, and those who resist will have to answer for it. The transmission abruptly cut off, leaving Lucian staring at the empty screen. A cold silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft hum of activity as the crew continued monitoring the systems. But Lucian was deep in thought, piecing together the implications of what Zyros had said. The Galactic Council was in ruins, but the vacuum left behind would only breed new chaos. There were factions out there, powerful factions, that would see Earth's rise as a threat. It was inevitable. He turned to Admiral Vex, who stood nearby, his gaze fixed on the displays. Vex's silence spoke volumes, and Lucian knew he was thinking the same thing. The war might have ended, but the real struggle had only just begun. Admiral, prepare for the next phase, Lucian said quietly. We need to strengthen our position. I won't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. Vex gave a sharp nod, his face hardening. Understood. I'll begin the preparations. Lucian glanced at the laser plasma displays one more time. The galaxy was on the brink of a new age, but there was still so much to do. Earth had won this battle, but the war for control of the stars, control of the future, was far from over. Humanity would have to prove its worth, not through force, but through diplomacy, strategy, and resilience. Meanwhile, on the fringes of the galaxy, far from Earth's reach, a different kind of storm was brewing. News of the Galactic Council's defeat had already spread like wildfire through the underworld, reaching the ears of every power-hungry faction, every mercenary group, and every planet looking for a way to take advantage of the Council's collapse. Vorik Heska, a shadowy politician from one of the Council's oldest member worlds, stood in the dimly lit war room of his flagship. His eyes gleamed with calculated ambition as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports, the laser plasma display before him flickering with images of Earth's victory. Earth, Vorik muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with disdain. They think they've won. They think they've taken the reins of the galaxy, but they have no idea what's coming. A figure stood behind him, silhouetted by the light of the display. What's our move, then? The figure asked, his voice low and full of purpose. Vorik turned, a dark smile forming on his lips. We'll let them think they have control. We'll let them celebrate their victory for now. But the real fight begins now. Earth is surrounded by enemies, and I plan to be the one to take advantage of their arrogance. He tapped a few keys on the console, sending a burst of data across the display. A new map appeared, one that detailed the various factions across the galaxy, their strengths and weaknesses. Some had already begun to mobilize, eager to fill the void left by the Council. Others were still assessing their next move. But for Vorik, the game was clear. He would align himself with those who could challenge Earth's dominance, and he would rise from the ashes of the Council's collapse, wielding new power. The time for subtlety was over. He would no longer hide in the shadows. Earth had made a powerful enemy today. "I'll need allies," Vorik said, his tone cool and methodical. "And I know exactly where to find them." Lucian Draeven sat in the dimly lit command center, the cool glow of the laser plasma displays casting sharp shadows across his face. The data streams shifted before him, constantly updating with intelligence from the shattered remnants of the Galactic Council. His mind, however, was far from the immediate victory. His thoughts were already racing ahead, navigating the complexities of a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos. "Admiral Vex," Lucian's voice was steady, but his eyes were burning with calculation. "Prepare the next phase. We need to move quickly before the other factions have time to organize." Vex, ever the stoic admiral, turned from his post and gave a sharp nod. His eyes were sharp, but there was something heavier about him now. A weariness born from the battle, but also from the knowledge that the real struggle was just beginning. "We can't waste time, Lucian," Vex replied. "The Council's collapse has opened up a vacuum, and others are already moving in. We need to secure our position, now." Lucian studied the heads-up displays as the data filtered through. The galaxy was in turmoil. Some factions were still licking their wounds after the fall of the Galactic Council, while others were too busy assessing their own strategies to make any immediate moves. But the danger was in the uncertainty. Earth had won a battle, but the war for control of the galaxy was far from over. "Factions are already reaching out," Lucian said, leaning forward. His eyes scanned the data on his screen, processing the information with methodical precision. "Some of them are gathering in the outer rim, others closer to the core. If we don't make our move now, Earth could be caught between competing forces. We cannot afford a divided front." Vex, ever the realist, stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "Our next step isn't just about military action. It's about diplomacy. If we can stabilize our position in the galaxy's political structure, we'll control the narrative. And that will give us the leverage we need." Lucian's eyes flicked over to a small comms officer in the corner, who had just finished compiling a series of transmissions. The officer looked up, his voice tentative but laced with urgency. "Sir, we've intercepted communications from several key systems. The remnants of the Council are making moves to gather support. There's already talk of uniting the remnants of the old order, possibly under a new leader." Lucian's jaw tightened as he digested this. The Council's collapse had not eradicated its influence, it had only fragmented it. Now disparate remnants would fight to reclaim what was lost, or worse, to sabotage Earth's rise. "We'll need to get ahead of this," Lucian said, his voice low, calculating. "If they unite under a new banner, the galaxy will face an even greater challenge than before." Vex nodded in agreement, his face grim. "But if we strike at the heart of the remnants before they can organize, we can destabilize their efforts before they gain any real ground." Lucian looked at the laser plasma display where the movements of various factions were already beginning to shift. Their positions were scattered, their intentions unclear. It was time to consolidate Earth's influence, to establish a foothold in galactic politics. "We'll need allies," Lucian said, his voice sharpening. "But we must be strategic. Not just anyone can be trusted. I'm not interested in creating temporary alliances. I want long-term stability." Vex's expression softened with understanding. "You're thinking about the economic balance," he said. "Securing key resources will give us the leverage we need to hold power and keep us safe from future threats." Lucian smiled, a rare flicker of pride crossing his features. "Exactly. We control the vital trade routes, the systems that fuel the war machines. I want Earth to be at the center of the galaxy's economy. That will secure our position and make any opposition think twice before striking." The strategy meeting continued late into the night. The hours stretched as Lucian's plan took shape, each detail falling into place. He had always been a master of long-term strategy, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The galaxy was at a crossroads. Earth's rise had shaken the established order, and there were forces out there that would stop at nothing to reassert control. As the meeting adjourned, Lucian remained seated at the center of the room, his eyes still focused on the laser plasma displays. He could feel the weight of the decisions ahead of him. Earth had won a great battle, but the true test would come in the political arena. If he could secure Earth's place in the galaxy's future, then he would ensure that humanity would never again be relegated to the shadows. He turned to the comms officer. I want to send a message to the major factions. Let them know that Earth is open for talks, but not at any cost. We're not going to beg for our seat at the table. The officer hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Understood, sir. Lucian leaned back in his chair, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over him. The battle had been won, but there were more games to play now. The next steps would define Earth's future. Lucian knew that. He had never been content to sit idly by. He had taken the initiative before, and now he would do it again. As Earth's communications reached the far corners of the galaxy, a new wave of reactions began to ripple through the factions. Some hesitated, unsure of whether to trust the sudden shift in power. Others saw opportunity. Among them was Vorik Heska, the politician from the Council's fractured remnants, who had been quick to assess the situation. He had already made plans to rally the remaining Council systems to his cause. In the shadows of his flagship, Vorik's lips curled into a tight, calculating smile. Lucian Draeven may think he's secured the upper hand, but he's made one critical mistake, he murmured to himself, fingers tapping across his console. He's underestimated how desperate the galaxy's underbelly is for power. The real war is not just against the remnants of the Council. It's against the forces rising in the darkness. Vorik's eyes gleamed with ambition. He had no intention of sitting idly by while Earth strengthened its position. He would strike while the galaxy was still in flux, while Earth was still vulnerable. There was power to be seized, and Vorik would take it. Back on Earth, Lucian Draeven knew that his next move had to be just as precise as the last. The factions were stirring, and the opportunities for new alliances and new enemies were multiplying by the second. He couldn't afford to underestimate anyone, not after the victory he had achieved. The next steps would be strategic. Earth would reach out, but they would not show weakness. They would extend the olive branch to those who could be trusted and strike preemptively at anyone who threatened their power. For the first time, Lucian Draeven felt the weight of leadership press heavily on his shoulders. Lucian Draeven stood alone in the command center, the hum of the laser plasma displays the only sound in the room. His fingers brushed the cool surface of the console, his mind still racing from the weeks of calculated strategy that had led Earth to this moment. The galaxy was no longer the same. It was a new dawn, one in which humanity no longer hid in the shadows, fearful of larger forces. Earth had shown its power, its resilience, and its intelligence. But there was one final act to perform, one last strike that would echo across the stars, a declaration that humanity had arrived. The data streams flickered before him, the once scattered factions now aligning under a new order. There were still those who resisted, but their opposition was weak, fractured. He had known that if Earth's strength was to be respected, it would take more than just military dominance. It would require a symbol, a moment that sealed Earth's place among the stars. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral Vex entered, his usual stoic expression softening just a fraction as his eyes met Lucian's. "We've received the final communications," Vex said quietly, stepping toward the command center's core display. "It's done. The remaining factions have accepted Earth's terms. The message is clear. No one will dare challenge us now." Lucian nodded, his gaze never leaving the screen as the new map of the galaxy began to unfold. The lines of power, once dominated by the Galactic Council, now bent toward Earth. The once insurmountable barriers had been broken. What had been an impossible dream, humanity standing tall, was now reality. But Lucian knew that it wasn't just about military victories or political power. It was about the legacy they were creating. They were writing their own future, and humanity's story was just beginning. He turned to Vex, his voice low but firm. "Prepare the transmission," Lucian said. "I need to send a message to the galaxy, one final message that will echo long after this war is forgotten." Vex raised an eyebrow, but nodded in understanding. "Understood, sir. One final declaration." "Yes." A declaration that not only shows our victory, but why we're here, why we'll never be swept aside again. Lucian's hand hovered over the console, his fingers brushing the cold metal, before finally pressing the sequence of commands that would send the message across every corner of the galaxy. A soft chime signaled the start of the transmission. His words would now be heard by every faction, every power still clinging to the old ways. The final truth was about to be delivered. Across the galaxy, factions still loyal to the old council scrambled to react. The remnants of the shattered empire were gathering, forming small alliances, attempting to strike fear into Earth's rising forces. But they were fragmented, directionless. When the transmission came through, it silenced all other communications. Every screen across every warship, station, and command center flickered to life, displaying Lucian Draeven's message in bold, clear letters. We are Earth. We do not kneel. We do not bend. We are not the children you once mocked. We are the storm that will shape the galaxy. You will not define us any longer. Lucian's voice resonated through the transmission, calm and measured, but carrying an undeniable weight. For too long, humanity has been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. You thought us weak, unworthy of the stars. You laughed at our fleet, our power, our resolve. But you were wrong. Now, we stand at the center of the galaxy, not as a footnote, but as its future. The galaxy will either adapt to Earth's rise, or it will be swept aside. No more alliances of convenience, no more underestimating the strength of human ingenuity. We are no longer a footnote. We are the next chapter. The words echoed through every transmission across the galaxy, reverberating across countless ships and stations. For the first time, the galaxy heard not just the power of Earth's military, but the force of its will. The Council's remnants, the old power structures, all found themselves suddenly small in the face of humanity's indomitable spirit. There was no retreat from this message, no place to hide. The broadcast ended with one final phrase that hung in the air like a warning. Next time, send better ships. Back on Earth, Lucian sat quietly, the soft glow of the displays illuminating his face as he listened to the silence that followed. It wasn't victory he was looking for. It was the satisfaction of knowing that humanity had proven its worth. Earth had been cast aside, but now it stood as the galaxy's new force, a force that would shape the future, not bend to the old ways. Vex stood behind him, his voice softer than usual. Do you think they'll listen? Lucian turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. They have no choice. The galaxy has seen the truth. They've seen the power of humanity, our strength, our intelligence. They will adapt, or they will fall. For a moment, Lucian looked out the viewport at the vastness of space, the stars twinkling like distant promises. Humanity was no longer the underdog in the shadows. They had proved that a small, unassuming species could rise to the top, not through sheer force, but through wit, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief that they deserved a place at the table. Look around you, Vex, Lucian said quietly. This is just the beginning. Earth isn't just another player in the galaxy anymore. We're the architects of what comes next, and no one will forget that. Vex nodded, his expression still unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes. A respect, a recognition of the weight Lucian had carried, the burden of leadership. We've done it. Earth is no longer a pawn. We're the ones holding the board. As Lucian Draeven walked away from the command center, the weight of the galaxy's future rested on his shoulders, but there was no fear in his heart. The hard part was over. The battle had been fought, and Earth had emerged victorious. Now, it was time for humanity to carve its place in the galaxy, not as the underdogs, but as the true heirs to the stars. The echoes of that final message reverberated across every corner of space, a resounding declaration. Earth was not a footnote in the galaxy's history. Earth had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again.